Hi everyone, Cable here, the internet's stuffiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this demo tape from Fulgor, To Be One with the Stars. Fulgor was a short-lived black metal band hailing from Germany, and this is a demo tape that they put out in 1993, or at least one of them. You see, back when this group was active between 1992 and 1995, they were only able to release 3 or 4 demo tapes and one EP that was released in 1995 before splitting up that same year. And usually that's where their story would end, as just another black metal project that tried and failed to make an impact. And in some ways, yeah, that is true, but I think I need to provide more context as to who these guys are. For you see, one of the members of Fulgor, that being Ancient Blasphemic Grave Invocator, which is quite the stage name to say the least, was actually a member of 2 other black metal bands that formed in Germany. The first one is Ungod, which formed in 1991, and while it is still active from what I can tell, ABGI would end up leaving the group around 1995. The other group that ABGI was a part of was formed the same year as Fulgor, that being Saxa, I guess. And this group is also still active from what I can tell, but according to Discogs, ABGI is also no longer a part of it. The other member of Fulgor, by the way, is the person who goes by the stage name Prince Raycon, and this appears to be the only project that they were ever a part of. Even though this project was very short-lived and saw only a small handful of releases, what's really interesting to me is that in 2020, 25 years after this group disbanded, a record label actually reissued their demo tapes in this limited edition vinyl box set, and even made a few shirts based on the band, which is just weird to think about, that this band, who only made a few demos, was able to garner a big enough following to the point where a record label made shirts of the group. But clearly that following had to have come from somewhere, and I have a couple of ideas as to how that happened. But before I go into that, I want to explain how I wound up finding out about this group. It was actually pretty recent that I learned about this project, as I was very curious about checking out some raw black metal albums. I was already getting acclimated into normal black metal, and because I had a small fascination with all things lo-fi, it felt natural that I would want to gravitate towards very raw and very lo-fi black metal, at least in theory. I think this drive to check out raw black metal was also aided by, well, Histologia, the main member of Flowering Shrubs, who I previously talked about with his album In the Sign of End Times about a month or so ago. To put simply, he fucking loves lo-fi stuff, so I began to browse what albums he really enjoyed, and out of all of them, this one piqued my interest the most. Mostly due to the album artwork, which is very intriguing, seeing this little town with shooting stars flooding the sky above. So after doing some digging around, I eventually found the files for this album and proceeded to listen to it. I'll go into my thoughts and feelings on this tape in a bit, but first I want to circle back to that previous question of how did Fulgor gain a small following. Originally I was going to speculate that it's because this release is marked on Rate Your Music as the first ever atmospheric black metal project to be ever released. And on some level, I do think that's true to some extent, but as I looked deeper, I noticed that Fulgor's music actually have a lot in common with another black metal project based out of Germany around the same time called Grausamkeit, which has certainly garnered a lot more attention in recent years, and I guess as a result, some folks went down this rabbit hole to find other raw black metal projects from Germany, and they stumbled across Fulgor. Again, I'm not 100% sure if that's the case. I wouldn't at all be surprised if a combination of those two theories was the actual reason. Anyways, as far as the contents of this tape is concerned, it has 11 songs and it clocks in at around 45 minutes long. So it's definitely a pretty beefy tape right out of the gate. And kicking off this tape, we have the song When the Wind Chimes, which is essentially an ambient intro to the tape. But already you can see some ambitions being brought forth into this demo as, well, it has an intro track. Maybe this is just because I'm not super familiar with how demo tapes work, but I was always under the impression that demo tapes don't have any structure whatsoever, as they're just a bunch of recordings that you send to a record label, producers, and fans to give them a sense of what you're like musically. Maybe that is true most of the time, but apparently not here, so already I was pretty intrigued going into this tape. As for the song itself, it has this sort of classical vibe to it, and it gives off the impression that you're about to go on some journey into this fantasy world of sorts. Now, usually demo tapes are notorious for featuring very lo-fi recording quality, which makes sense as it's not supposed to be some lavish studio recording or whatever. And even though this intro track is rough around the edges in terms of production quality, I was not at all prepared for what was going to happen next. Below the Moon is the first proper black metal track on the tape, and man, I was not expecting the production quality to be this low on my first listen. I wouldn't necessarily describe this as just a wall of noise, as I can make out some melody with the guitar riffs and synth work, but everything sounds very muffled, almost as if the band recorded these songs several feet away from the microphone. The drums are all but swallowed up by the sounds of the guitars, the vocals are unintelligible, and overall everything just sounds so grainy. And it fucking rules. I'm going to say this right now, but Below the Moon has become one of my favorite black metal songs of all time. For one, the main guitar riff is very infectious, and on top of that, the added synths give off this very twinkling feeling to the overall song because, well, yes, the guitars do sound like you're stuck in the middle of a blizzard. The synths kind of act like a beacon of light in the darkness, and it makes for a very interesting juxtaposition. Would this song be better if it was recorded with more fidelity? Realistically speaking, probably, but honestly, I don't really mind how lo-fi this is. If anything, it adds to the overall charm of the song. And honestly, I would recommend you listen to this demo tape just for this one song. It is that good. Following a short ambient track, we get A Landscape is Changing His Face. It's a 4-part song, and it's also the longest song of the whole tape, clocking in at nearly 10 minutes long. Overall, this is a really great song that features some incredible moments. I guess if I had to complain about anything, it's that the transitions between songs are basically non-existent. I'd personally love for there to be some sort of transition in between each part as opposed to one part abruptly ending and the next part abruptly starting. Still, it's an overall great song, and I enjoyed listening to it. Before I move on to the next black metal song, I should mention that this album's flow is essentially one of peaks and valleys. After each black metal song that is on this tape, it is followed by an ambient, or I guess I should say dungeon synth track, or interlude, that lasts between 30 seconds to as long as 3 minutes in the case of track 7, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce because, well, yeah. I think this approach works, but it does present a problem when trying to talk about each individual song because half the songs on here are just interludes. Because of that, I'll only talk about the black metal songs, but do know that I do really enjoy the interludes. Especially Retrospective View, which features some spoken word portions. Anyways, the next black metal song in the track listing is World Beyond the Mirrors, which is definitely one of the slower cuts on the album. I don't really have a whole lot of things to say in regards to this song, but I do think it's overall great. I just wouldn't call it a personal highlight, in my opinion. The Dream of My Empire, meanwhile, is probably my second favorite song on the whole tape, and it oddly sounds kinda lovely. I'm not entirely sure why, but the main melody that seeps through all the noise is upbeat sounding, even if this is another one of the slower cuts of the whole tape. It's weird, really, because if you take this melody and apply it outside of the context of black metal, I think you're left with something very beautiful and uplifting. Maybe this is just me, though, I don't know. The last black metal song of the whole tape is Profanus Fulgor, which is another song that is over 9 minutes long. But unlike the previous A Landscape is Changing His Face, this one isn't split up into movements. If anything, this is the most repetitive song of the whole tape. And it has this industrial flair to it, especially when you start the track. And it plots through its 9-minute runtime without barely stopping in its tracks. I really dig it, and it's pretty easy to get lost in the steady beat that the song offers. I know I said that I wasn't going to talk about each interlude in depth, but I do want to briefly bring up the closing track, tentatively titled Conclusion, which is this noisy black ambient song of sorts that features these distant screams of anguish that end the tape in a haunting way. And yeah, that was To Be One with the Stars. On the whole, I would definitely argue that this is one of those hidden gems within black metal that I wouldn't say is totally forgotten, as, like I said, it does have many fans, but I feel like in the larger conversation of black metal, this is never really brought up. I know that not everyone is going to check this out because of how it isn't on streaming services or even on Bandcamp, but if what I talked about interests you, then I would definitely recommend you seek out the tape for yourself. I'm pretty sure it's up on YouTube, so I'll provide a link to it in the description if you want to listen to it that way. And yeah, that'll do it for this video. I hope all of y'all enjoyed it, and as always, this is Cable, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye.